Thank you for having me here at the Gathering for Gardner. I kind of feel like one of the indigenous tribes that was off doing puzzles and things off on my own, and I've kind of now found my family home. So several of you have already seen the puzzle badge, which actually was originally designed to be the actual conference badge. Unfortunately, since most of the badge puzzles that I design are for security and hacker conferences, I don't place a place for the name. So because that was left off, the Gathering here always puts name tags on, and so this became a giveaway puzzle for those of you who've looked at it. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about this really quickly. I first have to apologize to those of you I've had discussions with already here at the conference who, generally speaking, the end of the conversation is, I'm scared as hell, or you've terrified me. That's not my intent. This is not my intent to come and give you my shock and awe talks as a hacker and security researcher, but to talk more about the puzzle stuff and creating magic and wonder in the world and happiness. So for those of you who don't know, this badge is actually a... There we go. It's actually a printed circuit board. The brass in it are the copper pads that you would normally solder to. There's just no components on it. And for those of you who hadn't noticed, that Martin's pseudonyms are hidden underneath the silk screen on the back. If you lay a piece of paper on it and do a rubbing, you can see Dr. Matrix and other things. So this is a multifaceted puzzle challenge. And I don't know if this is a first for the Gathering for Gardner, but somebody tweeted pictures of this out. It was me. And we've actually had several people remotely solving the puzzle. So I don't know if this is the first time we've had people external to the conference participating in puzzles that are going on at the conference itself. We have several groups within the conference who've been working on the puzzle, and a couple have actually solved the entire thing. It's it's not super involved like the other stuff that I do, but there you go. So for the Alice fans, you may notice the nictographic script here on the front. By the way, the bird is my poor artwork, but it's supposed to be a martin. And of course, there's some encoding there. And I know you're not laughing at my jokes because everything I say is encrypted in ROT26, but we won't go there. So that's the puzzle badge for you guys. If you have a moment and you're interested in that type of thing, please take a look at it. I've had discussions with other people who say the things that you do, Ryan, are not puzzles. And so I looked for a term for what I do. And the best I could come up with was mystery challenge. And I would like to give kind of a little backstory about how the mystery challenge that I did for a conference called DEF CON came about. Because I first went to DEF CON and I had created this embedded system inside of a skull back before everybody was doing communication from the internet to embedded devices. This was a long time ago, and I had written my own stack, and I was able to pull register values out of this setup I had done. So I could basically do dynamic HTML without really doing dynamic HTML. So I won this contest. My goal was to show these hackers, I can compete with you guys, and I wanted to win this contest 3 years in a row. So when I started preparing for the next year's conference to compete, I found out that the contest wasn't going to happen. So I volunteered to run a contest. And, and some folks, how many of you know Bunny Huang, MIT, wrote the Hacking the Xbox book, and Joe Grand, who's been on Prototype This, a couple other TV shows. So Joe Grand and Bunny actually threw their hat in the ring for the contest that I was creating. The funny thing was, I had never described what the contest was. And I found this to be a very powerful thing. The element of mystery. Like, a lot of people have come up to me about this badge and said, like, what am I supposed to do? And my response always is, that's for you to try and determine. That's part of the fun. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create more of those opportunities for that aha moment, like Nancy mentioned with the math in her talk, because I feel like modern technology has kind of destroyed magic and wonder in the world for a lot of kids. Like when I was a kid and I would see a magic trick, I would like to sit and think about how it was done, and then I would get the fun mental challenge of going through that process. We live in a time of instant gratification of knowledge, where a kid now, if he sees a magic trick, 98% of the time he can find some type of solution online for it, and it destroys the mystery. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't teach kids how to use Google efficiently and how to search, and that there aren't benefits to having knowledge quicker. But we don't have the mental exercise processes anymore like we used to. I really hate the term, and please forgive me if you use it, I hate the term thinking outside the box. Because the origin of the term Whether this is true or not, most people believe is the 9-dot puzzle. All of you familiar with the 9-dot puzzle connecting the lines? It's actually been studied and shown that if you take a control group of people and you actually remove the heuristic, you remove the paradigm in their head that they can't draw outside of this imposed box, that they can solve the solution. They've found that in control groups, the same number of people statistically can solve whether you tell them that information or not. And I found that very interesting because it's not these alternate pieces of information. It's not the fact that you have this imposed paradigm that you put on yourself that give you these epiphanal moments. It's a deep understanding of the problem space. It's working through that exercise. And that's what I try to provide in the puzzle challenges that I do. So how are we doing time-wise? Good? 4 minutes, okay. So at DEF CON every year, I thought I'd give you guys some examples of stuff that I did. And I didn't do slides because I tend to use them as a crutch if I have them. I do crazy stuff like you do, searching through. I like to abuse systems and use them in ways that they're not supposed to be used. One of my favorites one year is I gave everybody a puzzle book. I do hand book binding as kind of a side hobby. And in the book, I had all of these encryption puzzles that had red X's in them. And the hint was X marks the spot. If you went through and solved all of them, it was great, it was fun, but it wasn't the solution of the puzzle. In the cover of the book, I had an Ex Libris. And so the X I was referring to was the Ex Libris. And the Ex Libris wasn't red. It was the only X in the book that wasn't red. And I had actually embedded in the cover of the book a micro SD card. So they had to actually pull the cover of the book apart to get into the Ex Libris. And there were other clues building up to that to imply that that was the direction you had to go. So that's the type of stuff that I like to hide in my puzzles. So I'd like to talk a little further then about my nod to the 150 year for Alice. The nyctographic script that's on the lanyard simply translates to Gathering for Gardener 12. How many of you had already translated that? A lot of you, right? Fairly simple. How many of you tried to do the same type of decoding on the badge? Did it work? No, kind of. So I will give you the first step to try and encourage those of you who haven't looked at it. That's because I used a ROT12. Very simple cipher. It's the Gathering for Gardener 12, so I did a ROT12 there. I always do a ROT as some type of, I want the stages to get consecutively more difficult, so that's what there. So that's the type of change I do. How many of you recognize the encoding on the back? How many of you, when you first looked at it, recognized that encryption for what it is? On visual inspection only. No, only 2 people in this group, surprising. So this is 3. This is a literary reference also. This is Edgar Allan Poe's Gold Bug. So there was also something interesting with this, and I'm giving out steps that people have already solved, and I'm assuming people talked about it already. So you know in the Gold Bug cipher, it's a 1-to-1 substitution, but there's also punctuation involved. So if there's punctuation in the original message and you encrypt it, you get kind of the cyclical encryption that happens. So you get a little bit nuggets of information that may or may not be useful later on down the road. So this is my literary reference badge design for Martin. The other thing that I try and do in the puzzle challenges that I do is I try and get people to talk to each other. I'm very much a fan of the original Bell Labs. And I think that Bell Labs was successful because you had these wonderful people who were experts in their fields who had access to each other. And that access was very important. And they were cross-discipline, much like the group here is. And so I tend to take aspects of other areas, multiple areas, and throw them together to cause people to have to seek people out who are experts in their respective fields. And I think I don't see the Bell Labs anymore. Where is Bell Labs? Nobody's funding stuff like that anymore. Where are the think tanks? And so what I try and do is I put things like on the back of lanyards a lot of times so that when you talk to someone, you have to take off the lanyard and have a discussion. I've done electronic devices where you had to persist in front of someone else for a certain amount of time in order to solve certain parts of the puzzle. I've done things where you had to find someone in a crowd based on the propagation of their badge, which was infecting other badges of people around them. So you could follow people through the crowd because you knew where they had walked based on the wave. that came out of the signal in their badge. And it looks like we're at 6 seconds. If people want to talk about the security stuff, which I really didn't want to for my presentation, find me afterwards.